All right, so now we're going to get into the lower half of the appendicular skeleton, and we're going to talk about the pelvic girdle, which is made up of these coxal bones, right? And we're going to talk about the bones of the legs, ankle, and feet, okay? So this first bone here is the coxal bone, also known as your hip bone. Now this is actually a left coxal bone, okay? And there are three major bones that make up the coxal bone, three major parts. You have the first part here, this large part on top, which kind of flares out and forms the prominence of the hip, which is called the ilium, right? This is the ilium. And then two bone parts make up the bottom half. If you turn it to the side, you can distinguish these a lot more easily. So this fatter, rounder part towards the back here is called the ischium. So that sits towards the back of the body. And then you have the pubis or pubic bone, which sits towards the front half, kind of pokes out towards the front, okay? That one's a little bit pointier when you look at it from the side, okay? So the ischium is the more rounded one, and the pubis or pubic bone sticks out towards the front. It's a little pointier, okay? Then we move to the socket, hip socket of the coxal bone. That's this large socket right here. It is called the acetabulum. And what its use is for, the head of your femur, which is the upper bone in the leg, sits in the acetabulum and forms the hip joint. Okay, so that's what that socket is for. We have a structure when you turn the coxal bone to the side, this large notch right here. It's called the greater sciatic notch, okay? And this large hole right here is called the obturator foramen. All right, so that's it for the coxal bone. Moving on to the femur now. So this is the largest long bone in the body. It makes up the top half of the leg. This is the anterior view of the femur, and this is the posterior view of the femur, okay? The way you can tell anterior and posterior apart is in the bottom half down here, this one that has kind of the smooth surface, that's called the patellar surface. That's where your patella sits, okay? So that's the anterior side, the front side of the femur. If you flip it over, you see this giant space in between these two structures here. These are the medial and lateral condyles. And there's a large notch called the intercondylar notch, okay? Now remember, how did I tell you how to tell medial and lateral apart again from that last video? Well, you find the head, okay? So this is the head of the femur up here. This large ball structure is the head. That fits in the acetabulum to help form the hip joint. And if you go straight down from the head, you'll see the medial condyle of the femur. This one over here is the lateral condyle of the femur. And again, that large notch is the intercondylar notch, okay? Now moving back up towards the top, again, the head of the femur here. Underneath the head, we have the neck of the femur. And then if you flip the femur to the posterior side, you'll see these nice large structures called trochanters. You have the greater trochanter up near the head of the femur, lesser trochanter down beneath. All right, so those project outwards, greater and lesser trochanters. And then we also have the gluteal tuberosity, which is this ridge of bone that runs down the surface of the femur. Okay. Moving on to the patella. Patella is commonly known as the kneecap. It's a little short bone that sits on the patellar surface of the femur and kind of forms a little gliding joint there. All right, that one's easy to pick out. Then we move to the lower half of the leg. It's made up of two bones. Those are the tibia and the fibula. All right, these two bones make up the lower half of the leg. Now the tibia is the only bone of these two that is actually weight bearing, that holds weight, okay? The fibula is more just for structural purposes, doesn't really hold any weight. The tibia is also the bone that makes your shin bone, so that bone you feel down in the shin, that's your tibia, okay? So let's go over the structures of this one. Now this one, the way that I tell these two apart, to me a tibia is really large at the top and then it gets skinnier, so it looks kind of like a T if you hold it this way. And then the fibula is a whole lot skinnier. Okay, it's much, much smaller of a bone, but it's very long, and so you can see how they sit perfectly side by side. So starting at the top of the tibia, right, this is the top here where it's kind of wide. We have two structures called the lateral and medial condyles. Now, you do not have a head on the tibia, so you can't use the head as a point of reference to tell what the medial side is. But what you can do is, if you look at the bottom of the tibia, you guys see this piece sticking off of the bottom down here? That structure is called the medial malleolus. So that tells you that this is the medial side of the tibia. So if we go back up to the top, right, and look right here, we now see the medial condyle of the tibia, which means this one over here is the lateral condyle of the tibia. This piece that sticks up in between the condyles is the intercondylar eminence. Intercondylar means in between the condyles, okay? Right on the front of the tibia, there's a big piece that kind of bulges out a little bit right here. That's called the tibial tuberosity, okay? So that's all that you need to know from the tibia. Let's move that one out of the way. And then getting to the fibula, this one's pretty easy. There's really just two structures to know. If you turn it long ways, you might notice that one of these is a little bit longer, all right, when you look at it. So this one up here that's a little bit flatter is called the head of the fibula. And down at the bottom, all right, down here, where it's a little elongated, that's called the lateral malleolus. And so the lateral malleolus forms the lateral portion of the bottom half of your leg. So that would be found on this side, right? And then you have the medial malleolus found on the tibia on the other side. And those are going to help form the ankle joint, okay? So now moving down into the ankle and the foot. Remember we said carpals are our wrist bones. So what are the ankle bones? Those are the tarsals. Okay, so you can see these little short bones here. I don't want you to know all of the names of these, but I do want you to know the calcaneal bone. That's this big one here, calcaneus, and the talus, all right, which is this bone right here that helps form your ankle joint. So you can see the tibia sitting on top of the talus here. So this is the talus. The rest of these, just know them as tarsals, right? Then underneath that, we have our metatarsals. Then we get into the phalanges, right? Again, your big toe, just like your thumb, only has two phalanges. It has a proximal and a distal, but the rest of them have three. So you have a proximal phalange, a middle phalange, and a distal phalange on the end, okay? So go ahead and go through all those bones of the lower half of the appendicular skeleton and let me know if you have any questions.